party. Okay. All right. Many thanks for that, Jessica Lemaisoyer. Thanks for that news for the news bulletin there. Caught me off guard. They were busy discussing already getting ahead of ourselves here with tonight's topic. Welcome to the France 24 debate amid regime change to the south in Egypt, an uprising to the east in Syria, and Israel and the Palestinian territories may have seemed to slip under our radar at times these past months. Not this Wednesday, however. In Cairo, secular Fatah and Islamist Hamas bearing the hatchet, ending a 4-year rift that could pave the way to the formal recognition by the international community of a Palestinian state later this year, hence the alarm of some.
What happened today in Cairo is a tremendous blow to peace and a great victory for terrorism.
A great victory for terrorism, says the Israeli Prime Minister. However, the battle lines may not be as clear-cut as Benjamin Netanyahu sees them. For a start, Hamas leader Khaled Mashal did not share the podium with Fatah's Mahmoud Abbas, seating arrangements holding up that ceremony in Cairo. And by the way, neither personally signed the unity document. Can Palestinians truly reconcile? Is there a real threat to the Jewish state, or is this an opportunity for peace, as some Israelis argue? And how has the Arab Spring weighed on this entire process? Today in the France 24 debate, the Palestinian show of unity with, from Ramallah, senior advisor to Mahmoud Abbas, Sabri Saidam. Thank you for joining us. Here in our studio, Einat Wilf, Israeli MP of the Independence Party. Joining us from Monafia, some 70 kilometers northeast of Cairo, Hazem Farouk Mansour. We hope to speak to him a little bit later. He's a former Egyptian MP from the Muslim Brotherhood. France 24 Annette Young is with us as well. We want to thank you for your feedback on the France 24 Debate Facebook page. And you can also follow our guests on Twitter, our handle at Francois F24. There you go. There's the Facebook. There's the Twitter. And we can begin in Berlin, though, where the Palestinian president Mahmoud Abbas was headed after signing that deal in Cairo. Ilan Halevi of the General Delegation of Palestine joins us from the German capital there. Thank you for being with us. And first of all, has Mahmoud Abbas arrived?
Yes, he's arriving now.
He's arriving now. What do you make of the fact that what we mentioned in the introduction there, that there wasn't a handshake between him and the Hamas leader, Khaled Mashal, and they didn't sign the document. Instead, it was others who signed for them?
Yeah, well, the signature was not. I mean, it's not very significant whether Mashal and Mahmoud Abbas signed personally or not. The atmosphere was very cordial, and the agreement exists, and it was signed. You know, if one looks at reasons to see it fail, then one can see signs in minor details of protocol.
Some have called
this is not the issue.
Some have called this a surprise.
This is not the issue. The issue is that this unity is first and foremost a Palestinian popular demand. In many ways, it is the Palestinian, the impact of the Arab Spring on Palestinian politics is also this agreement, which was really a popular demand and a popular pressure upon the leadership of both fractions.
So you're saying that the Arab Spring helped concentrate the minds of leaders?
It helped make leaders listen to their rank and file more carefully.
And final question before you go, Ilan Halevi. Getting back again to that issue, you say it's not the main issue, but will we see soon a photo opportunity between Mahmoud Abbas and Khaled Mashal?
Yeah, sure. There were. I've seen them today on television together.
All right. So we'll thank you for joining us there from Berlin, where you're with the Palestinian president who's arriving there. We mentioned at the outset the stark contrast in reactions between Palestinians and Israelis over what is happening. I want to get back with you, Einat Wilf, to the strong words we heard from the Israeli Prime Minister, who's having a dinner in London this Wednesday with his British counterpart. Is it a victory for terrorism?
I think it's yet difficult to tell where this will head. I mean, on one hand, actually, this certainly is a positive move in the sense that the Palestinians are answering to popular demands. This was something that Palestinians wanted very much. They wanted to see unity government. For us Israelis also, it's very important that once, hopefully, we get back to negotiating, that we negotiate with a partner that actually can represent the Palestinian people. And should an agreement be signed, we can be sure that they will stand behind it, and there will not be any splinter groups who say, well, we don't agree with what you've just signed. So in that respect, it could be a positive move. The concern, of course, is that any agreement between Hamas and Fatah, assuming that they need to compromise in one way or the other, is likely to move their positions further away from peaceful positions. Assuming that Hamas has not completely allowed itself to become Fatah, to go in that direction, then any compromise between the two is likely to take us perhaps quite a few steps away from peace, and that is the concern.
Let me get the reaction there from Sabri Saidam in Ramallah. Does today's deal mean a radicalization of Fatah?
No, not at all. If anything, it's building consensus, and I commend your guest on picking on that point, because that's the first Israeli reaction that I hear in which consensus building amongst the Palestinians is really favored by Israelis. They see that this is a peace opportunity. If Hamas and Fatah join hands, then in the future any peace deal will not be subjected to a local referendum in the West Bank, but rather a comprehensive referendum across the board of the Palestinians, covering Gaza and East Jerusalem and possibly the diaspora. What's also most important is for the international community, if you allow me, to understand that negotiations will always be in the hands of the PLO, and that the government to come is going to focus on preparing for elections. So there's nothing to fear. This is building consensus. This is focusing on ending occupation. And this is addressing indeed the demand of the Palestinian people.
Annette Young, some observers say this has been a surprise deal. Would you agree with that?
Well, it certainly was. And in fact, our correspondent Gallagher Fenwick had been in Gaza the day that the news broke, and had come back. And when he rang the people back, hey, did you have any idea this was going to happen? All of them sort of expressed incredible surprise, because it was done very secretively. No doubt, motivated by what was happening in the Arab streets, because you get the sense among the Arab leadership across the region that this is of incredible concern to people such as those Hamas leaders and people in the West Bank. There'd already been some protests, some rallies calling for greater democracy, calling for greater freedom, greater transparency in the Palestinian territories. And they knew that the time had come to really step up to the plate and sign a deal. Well, sign a deal as in they're both now were sitting in the same room, as you saw. They didn't sign an agreement. And there will be some obstacles ahead. There's no doubt about that. We certainly haven't seen, it's not going to be a walk in a rose garden. That's
the fact that we didn't see that handshake, you heard at the outset there what Ilan Halevi had to say. Is it a big deal?
I think it is in that sense, and I think the fact that there was a hoo-ha about where one was going to sit and who comes ahead of the other gives you some indication. I mean, okay, it's protocol, but it's a very symbolic gesture in the Arab world, and it gives you some indication of what lies ahead as they sit down. And negotiations have started as we speak about how one is going to construct that interim government, the way in which things are going to play out in the next 12 or so months until the upcoming elections. And there are a lot of issues that they're going to have to resolve. It's a big divide.
We'll get to some of those issues in a moment. Hamas and Fatah approaching the table from different angles. Just to give you an example, listen to some of the reactions to the killing of Osama bin Laden, which reflects that rival rift between, divisions certainly, between the rival Palestinian movements.
I definitely view this as a major, indeed, mega landmark event, marking the end of the life of the person who clearly was involved in egregious acts of terror and destruction.
We think that this is a continuation of the American oppression and shedding of blood of Muslims and Arabs. Although Hamas had its differences with Al-Qaeda, this group condemns the assassination of a Muslim, an Arabic warrior, and prays that bin Laden's soul rests in peace.
There we saw the reaction there of the Prime Minister in Gaza, Ismail Haniyeh, the rival prime ministers with completely different reactions. Let me get your reaction to this, Sabri Saidam. Is it? Can you sit down with somebody who sends words of praise like that for Osama bin Laden?
Well, the Palestinians have nothing to do with Osama bin Laden, and honestly speaking, I find the statement of Mr. Haniyeh rather peculiar, since he stands on the other side of the spectrum. He aligns himself with the Islamic Brotherhood that has condemned Osama bin Laden a long time ago. So I was really surprised by the statement. On the other hand, and because you've brought up the issue of Abu Mazen not shaking hands with Khalid Mash'al, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that post the ceremony today in Cairo, Khalid Mash'al did visit Abu Mazen in the guest palace and indeed did the Islamic Jihad. So the good gestures are there and things are on the right track.
Okay. We also see, by the way, that there are some divisions over how to react within the Israeli camp. You alluded to them a moment ago. The Israeli daily newspaper Haaretz has this Wednesday published excerpts from a report delivered earlier this week by diplomats to Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman, which sees this as an opportunity. Instead of counseling blanket opposition to a Palestinian unity government, the authors of the report recommend that Israel adopt a constructive approach that would sharpen the dilemma on the Palestinian side regarding the aims of such a government and Hamas's unwillingness to recognize Israel. And I have to ask you this question. Can you translate for us, please? When Benjamin Netanyahu says, this is a great day for terrorism. Sorry, those weren't the exact words.
Those were not the words.
But when he says that, is that what he believes? Or is that playing to the gallery?
No, it's not playing to the gallery. Certainly, he's very concerned. We are all very concerned. I'm generally of the approach that you should give people the benefit of the doubt. I can see the positive aspect of this element, as discussed earlier, the possibility of having a consensus government and a single representative. But you cannot ignore, and you've shown the way that Hamas responded to the killing of bin Laden. I mean, you cannot ignore the history of Hamas as a terrorist organization. You cannot ignore the fact that they continue to use violence against civilians, that they continue to, they refuse to recognize the right of the Jewish people to have their own state. They do not accept the idea that they should respect previous agreements that were signed with Israel. So certainly what the Prime Minister reflects is one concern. I do believe that it's important at least to give the benefit of the doubt. While it is possible that things will not go well, we should at least this is for the Palestinians to decide. This is their government. It's clear, of course, now that the world in general, as well as Israel, would be watching very closely, perhaps reading very closely into the signs going forward. For example, the makeup of the government. That's going to send a very important signal. Is Fayyad, whom you brought earlier, who's a very moderate person, who's actually, in my view, the first person who actually focuses on building a Palestinian state rather than destroying the Israeli one. is he going to stay in government? And if he doesn't...
We're going to get to that point in a moment, but you mentioned the fact that Hamas does not recognize Israel. But let's take a listen to what Khaled Mashal said in Cairo this Wednesday, as far as what he sees are the aims of the accord that was spelled out.
Our shared objectives are to create a Palestinian state which is free and independent in the West Bank and in Gaza, a free and independent state without renouncing the rights of our Palestinian brothers.
Sabri Saidam, let's see, West Bank, Gaza, is he in fact, did we just hear Khaled Mashal, in a way, recognize Israel?
Well, I disagree on this occasion with your guest on the fact that she had said or claimed that Hamas does not recognize the right of the Jewish people to have a land of their own or a homeland of their own, because Hamas has long said that it will recognize a Palestinian state on the 1967 borders only if just peace prevails. And indeed, that's the formula Fatah is pushing. Just peace is fair and square for all partners. So indeed, we are pushing in that direction. And I think Khaled Mashal is indeed working towards ending the rift. And I think he means well. And all of us mean well in the direction of promoting peace and building this consensus in Palestine and bridging the gap that has long prevailed over the last 4 years.
Is Hamas becoming more moderate? We put the question on the France 24 Debate Facebook page. Let's take a look at what Bayo from Lagos wrote. Moderate from whose point of view? Moderate enough for Israel. Netanyahu has to realize that Israel is running out of options. Annette Young, before we touch again on Israel's position, do you see Khaled Mashal's stance mellowing?
Well, I certainly see. I mean, Sabri Saddam is correct in that it's not the first time that Khaled Mashal has talked about the recognition of a state of such. Note he omits the key word Jewish, but the state on 1967 borders. Again, as I started at the beginning of this discussion, I think is a reflection of what's going on within Hamas. Keep in mind there are also divisions within Hamas. There are the hardliners and there are the more moderate. It is interesting because what has happened in Damascus is they've tended to be the ones who are more hardline. And I would argue that the fact that they've turned up in Cairo shows that there has been a softening. But who is it in Cairo who greeted them? And that's the key point. It's a new regime. The previous regime, they had no time for. This regime, they believe, is more sympathetic to Hamas, given it's more sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood. So they felt that they could talk to somebody. They certainly didn't feel that way with Omar Suleiman, who was the chief negotiator for the Egyptians beforehand, who was obviously doing the bidding of President Hosni Mubarak. So that's another important factor in all of this.
Another important factor that we'll get back to when we return. Stay with us. The France 24 Debate continues. Welcome back. You're watching the France 24 Debate. Before we resume, just a capsule of some of the stories we're following for you at the top of the hour with Laura Baines. Fatah and Hamas and their 4-year rift at a ceremony in Cairo. The reconciliation deal could, according to some analysts, stall peace talks with Israel. It is the topic, of course, of the France 24 Debate here. Controversy over Osama bin Laden's death dominates talks between the Pakistani Prime Minister and the French President here in Paris. Concerns over the deadly U.S. raid on Pakistani soil dominating the discussion. A crackdown on protests in Syria. Convoy of tanks spotted near Damascus. Witnesses say they thought they saw them heading to the southern flashpoint city of Daraa. And a police officer shot dead in northern Turkey. The attack took place in Kastamonu just hours after the Prime Minister, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, held an election rally in the town. CNN Turk TV reports the policeman was killed during a firefight between an armed group and police officers. No one has claimed responsibility. Kurdish separatists may be behind the attack, hint authorities. And also a bailout deal for Portugal. We'll have that story and much more for you at the top of the hour. Welcome back. Welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate, and we're discussing the show of unity in Cairo today between rival Palestinian factions Hamas and Fatah, burying the hatchet after 4 years, pledging elections within the year. Here to talk about it with us from Ramallah, the top advisor to the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, Sabri Saidam. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Einat Wilf, Israeli member of the Knesset from the centrist Independence Party, which is split
from the Labour Party.
From the Labour Party, but you're in the majority. You side on the majority side of the...
We sided in the government. Our faction is now part of the coalition government, and the Labour Party has now gone into the opposition.
Okay, and also with us Annette Young, France 24's International Affairs Desk. And for 7 years, where were you the correspondent again? I've forgotten.
Some tiny place called Jerusalem.
Okay. Before the break, Sabri Saidam and talking about the high expectations for the Palestinians themselves. Associated Press Television spoke to two brothers, one in the West Bank, the other in Gaza, and got their reaction to today's deal.
The current situation in the Strip makes me very sad. I think that the people who are working on the reconciliation now in Cairo should put the pain of the people of Gaza first, seeing how they've suffered for 4 years.
All right, and we can maybe hear from his brother now over in the Gaza Strip.
We hope that the intentions will be good, and hopefully the reconciliation will happen very soon. We are waiting for the moment that we can meet there with our brother and his family, and with all the Palestinian families that were affected by the division.
So high expectations, families that want to be reunited. Annette Young, a lot of obstacles remain. Obviously, reuniting families is
one of many. But let's talk about the obstacles that these two parties are going to have to confront. And I think we've got a graphic coming up on the screen to show the viewer. The first is composition of the government. And as Dr. Einat Wilf was pointing out earlier, the big issue is who's going to be the Prime Minister. Now, Hamas have made it clear they don't want Salam Fayyad. Now, for many, particularly many in the international community, that would be a travesty because he's been seen as a man who comes to the job with incredible credibility. He's worked from memory with it was the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. I've just momentarily forgot which outfit it was, but he's a renowned economist. He's very committed. Having met him, he's very sort of, he's one of these people who's there to do the job.
Let me break in. Sabri Saidam, who are you rooting for to be the next Prime Minister for the Palestinian territories?
I personally have no preference. I certainly hope that this issue proves to be also an issue of consensus, that the two parties get to select somebody who's independent. Obviously, they've made up their mind. The agreement clearly states that it has to be an independent government, i.e. the Prime Minister has to be an independent person. So is the case with the ministers. So that's a detail that has to be hammered down in the coming hours or so before an appointment by the President is issued and a request for the formation of cabinet is indeed issued.
Coming hours, so we'll know the name of the new Prime Minister very shortly.
Well, I believe so. Don't quote me on this. I'm hopeful that this issue will not be an issue of an obstacle, but rather an issue of agreement, so that we are able to form this government. Obviously, this is not going to happen overnight. Once the president selects somebody to lead the cabinet, he will have by law up to 5 weeks to choose that cabinet. So the appointment does not mean of a prime minister, does not mean that the current government goes home. It will continue to be the government responsible for caretaking. until the government is sworn in. And this time, for a change, it will be before sworn in before the Palestinian Legislative Council, which is, according to the Constitution, that's the proper approach to appointing governments in Palestine.
And at item 2 on your agenda, there is security. And what you're talking about there is security
in both West Bank and in Gaza. And, you know, are we going to see the Hamas rulers in Gaza allow Fatah personnel from the Palestinian Authority to go in there? Now, the big issue, of course, is monitoring those borders, and that's something, obviously, I would also like to talk to Sabri Saddam about, is, you know, has been one of the discussions, of course, this has all gone out the window now that we have a new regime in Cairo, is the sort of opening up of the Rafah tunnel and monitoring and making sure, and of course, it was a sticking point for Hamas to have members of the Palestinian Authority security personnel working in any sort of capacity there as observers to watch the incomings and goings across the border. So, of course, this is something which will be a sore point. And given that it's only 4 years ago that we saw that bloody takeover in Gaza, in that part of the world, memories go back a long way. So I would be curious to know what Sabri Saddam has to say about that. Sabri Saddam, do you have any comment about what is going to happen in regards to those security arrangements?
Well, as far as the security arrangement in the West Bank, you will have to know that Israel will not allow any contribution or participation of Hamas in any arrangement, and that point is already made clear by the Egyptians to Hamas, and they believe and accept in this. The point of disagreement to the last minute was the control of Rafah, and the Egyptians support the Palestinian Authority's quest for the redeployment of the presidential guard. So that has now been agreed, and I believe we will go back to restoring presidential guards. But the whole issue at large in terms of rearranging the security apparatus is going to take some time, and I believe it's going to take a full year before the whole issue is resolved. Remember, Hamas had recruited new cadets into its executive police force, so that's going to take a while to absorb in terms of administration and in terms of recruitment and integration in the Palestinian police force at large.
There was a third item on your
exchange of prisoners. Now, this is another important issue because the Israelis are not going to be too happy about the idea about Hamas prisoners being released in the West Bank. Now, at the moment, there's a fair degree of cooperation between the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority. Again, this will be a note of concern. And these are the sort of items that the Israeli security establishment are very, very worried about.
The issue of security between the Israelis and the Palestinians coming to a head, and yet at the same time, we've seen that the truce has been extended. Do you see Israelis in the short term, being safer or less safe as a result of today's deal?
It really depends ultimately on how both Fatah and Hamas decide to conduct themselves. Fatah has understood that for the Palestinian people to thrive, they need security. They have done very important work on creating a secure West Bank. I think for many people who have visited the West Bank, it's been very clear. Israel has also contributed much to make life in the West Bank easier. And with respect to Gaza and Hamas have been in a state of war with Israel for the past few years. They continue, even until recently, to launch rockets into civilian areas. So the question is, are they, as part of this agreement, going to renounce it? Ultimately, the world has issued, quite a few years ago, to the Hamas some very simple conditions in order to enable negotiations: renounce violence, accept previous agreements, and recognize Israel. If the new government, the joint government, is going to accept these parameters, then certainly there's basis for cooperation.
Do you see that happening?
I don't know. As I said, I think we should definitely give them the benefit of the doubt, but we should also be very clear on what the parameters should be. I'd also like to add about Prime Minister Fayyad. if he's not going to be there, they're going to have to come up with someone quite extraordinary to be the prime minister, because he's done so much to really establish the basis of a Palestinian state. I mean, he's really gone in a very different direction than Palestinian leaders have gone in the past. Not the direction of resistance, not looking at what Israel does, but actually working to build their own state. In many ways, this is the Zionist spirit that has created the state of Israel, focusing on building your own state, the infrastructure. If he goes away, the world community that contributes a lot of money to the ongoing operations of the Palestinian Authority is really going to wonder how the money is going to be dispersed, and whether to continue to give that money if they can no longer be sure that it is properly managed.
So, just a quick reaction on that before we move on. Sabri Saidam, do you agree?
Well, I agree on one point, that Hamas and Fatah have agreed now on the establishment of a government that totally adheres to the Quartet's principles, acknowledges the agreements and respects and observes the agreements signed by the PLO, and that the government will have no political say whatsoever. It will focus on three missions.
But on the point of Salam, excuse me for interrupting. On the point of Salam Fayyad, is he in a way the way described there by Einat Wilf? He's almost irreplaceable.
I would say that we will come up with a respectable name. It will be a name that's going to continue the path of building Palestinian institutions towards the recognition of the state of Palestine, and will continue the journey of peace only if Israel does not only give the benefit of the doubt, but rather moves in the direction of ceasing settlement activities, because basically for the Palestinians, you cannot negotiate your pizza while it's being eaten. That's the simple principle. You want peace, you have to stop building settlements, and you have to give the Palestinians back their home, and you have to acknowledge UN resolutions upon which the entire peace negotiations have all been built.
And who's on the short list?
As I said, I have no names whatsoever. Remains to be seen. Okay. But as I said, we will come up with a decent name to run government.
Now, earlier, thanks for that, keeping your cards close to your chest there. Earlier, France 24's Roselyne Febvre spoke to the French Foreign Minister, Alain Juppé, who reiterated hints on the part of the French that come September, they may be ready to recognize a Palestinian state.
He decided to put pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu. That is the objective of today's meeting, and on all the protagonists, on the Palestinians and the Israelis, so that they return to the negotiating table. Will we succeed in persuading them? Will the United States go in the same direction? We shall see in the next couple of months. And in September or October, we will have to make a decision on whether or not to recognize the Palestinian state, just like the president said.
Now, that's a concern that's front and center inside the Israeli cabinet. Spokesperson, the Vice Prime Minister, speaking earlier in the day.
What needs to be done these days is to prevent those efforts of the Palestinians to get the recognition in the UN Assembly to have a new Palestinian state. Because if we will give them the recognition, it will help the Iranians to build one more front base here within the Middle East.
Einat Wilf, are you singing from the same hymn sheet as Sylvain Shalom?
In Israel, nobody sings from the same hymn sheet always. But in general, one should know, really, I mean, there's a lot of discussion of this declaration in September of the General Assembly. First of all, listen to the words of Foreign Minister Alain Juppé. He said that France will have to decide in September. That's it. Pretty much stating the obvious. Yes, everyone will have to decide in September. So, yes, and that's one of the way of kind of playing the diplomatic and foreign policy game. But ultimately, the vote in September and the desire of the Palestinians to see a declaration by the UN General Assembly of a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, it's a symbolic element. It does not create a state. A state is created through several steps. First, negotiations with Israel. If the Palestinians want to have a real state, if they want to have the pizza, they actually have to negotiate with Israel. The UN General Assembly, that will be an element of sympathy, clearly, perhaps a symbolic victory, but an actual state, a people who actually wants a state rather than declarations in the UN, typically behaves very differently and actually negotiates even if they are not very favorable to the government. The other thing is also, even if the General Assembly declares a state, the Palestinians so far have been very careful, and Abu Mazen has also said that in Newsweek, that they themselves will not declare the state. The UN General Assembly can do so, say that it would recognize such a state once it's created, but the Palestinians have been very careful to say that they themselves would not declare it because they know that as soon as they declare it, not the UN General Assembly, it constitutes a unilateral step which pretty much kills all the existing agreements between Israel and the Palestinians, and it opens the way also for Israel to take some unilateral steps. And ultimately, this is not what any of us want. We want a negotiated agreement, and yes, it will require tough decisions from Israelis, from Palestinians. No one is enthusiastic about making those tough decisions, but it's the only way to get an actual state rather than a nice declaration in New York.
Okay, so what's certain on the Israeli side is there is international pressure, and that is helping to concentrate the minds for some. On the Palestinian side, and I want to conclude by going back to the statement that was made at the outset by Ilan Halevi, how the Arab Spring has helped to concentrate the minds for Palestinians, especially for the leaders of the Palestinians. Sabri Saidam, when you see the mood in Cairo this Wednesday, do you agree with what was said at the beginning?
Well, I agree totally with the fact that we need to end occupation. That's the prime concern, and that's what we need to focus on. I'm very surprised by some Israeli reactions. If you move towards Hamas and you establish Palestinian unity in preparation for a peace deal to come in which consensus will be achieved, you're accused of bringing Iran in. If you say, no, I don't want Hamas and I want to negotiate, Israel comes in and says, oh, you negotiate on my own terms, I want to build settlements and you negotiate with me. I think, Palestinians have had enough of this endless cycle. There's been negotiations for the last 20 years that have yielded absolutely nothing. So for the first time, the Palestinians in the past have inspired revolutions worldwide. This time we're being inspired by the Egyptians, the Tunisians, and what have you, in the direction of saying to the occupation, enough is enough. And I want to tell your guests that maybe it is time that Israel considers a gesture from the Palestinians to end the occupation, because basically ordinary Palestinians in the streets are about to lose hope in UN resolutions and are about to forget about even the Arab initiative and any peace deal with Israel. The sky is the limit, and now if you look at the virtual media, they're calling now for total independence. So Israel needs to listen, and I think a good friend of Israel would have to advise it that it is time it recognized the Arab initiative and stop talking about the provisional state.
All right. Spring has not yet come to the Palestinian territories there, according to Sabri Saidam. I want to thank you for joining us from Ramallah. I want to thank you, Einat, Wilf, and France 24's very own Annette Young. Thank you for being with us for the France 24 debate.